Welcome once more, gentle guests. I am the OmnusCritic, here once more before you to bring forth another artifact of gaming history, to reintroduce an old classic that otherwise modern gamers might be unaware of, that might deserve a little amplification, or the flaws of which be brought before your attention, so if you should stumble upon this, you might consider with a little bit more educated palate. The title we're looking at today comes all the way back from 1984, from a company that certainly created many role-playing game and other type of game assets, ranging from the card game Nuclear War, which the players are world leaders who play in a game of nuclear war with the last person with any population winning. And of course, they had their own game properties, such as Legenda, which had a fictionalized world and used a universal system that was designed to be plugged in. It was left relative so that it was friendly to be able to be inserted into whatever game you found to be the one that spoke to you best. From Rollmaster to Dungeons and Dragons, you could use that material to basically enhance your game, give yourself more materials or some different ideas that you could import easily. Today's offering is another such game, somewhat infamous in vintage gaming circles because of its very nature. That book is Grimtooth's Traps. Now, Grimtooth's Traps is a relatively small book, really only 54 pages of traps and things, but it is a collection of game concepts, various traps designed to injure, misdirect, and occasionally murder your player characters, known affectionately in these circles as Delvers, a title which I'm quite fond of myself and enjoy using when referring to characters that are in a campaign of dungeon delving. These Delvers will find themselves bedeviled by 101 traps found within these pages, ranging from all of the different categories, from room traps, corridor traps, door traps, item traps, and a variety of things that don't easily fit in any one category. These various styles of traps are broken down into the different categories in which they fit, so that you can easily reference and plug in a trap into a given scenario that you want to punch up a little bit. This is an ideal product for a person who doesn't have a great deal of imagination when coming up with various traps. Anyone can imagine a flame jet shooting out of a wall, perhaps, or a poison needle set into a lock that would confound a person attempting to pick said lock, or the release of poison gas at a door if a trap is tripped. These are things that are often referenced in game manuals themselves without resorting to something like this. No, what Grimtooth's Traps does is it brings forth a variety of concepts, basically clever little ways of setting up traps. Most of the traps within here are not on their face obvious, or perhaps have a different style to bringing forth the doom or discomfiture of your delvers. Not all of the traps are designed around themes. Some of them are just insert and go. There are some concepts within that really can be plugged into any situation. Some of them are very, very specific. Many of the room traps, for instance, require an entire room to be designed around the trap to make it work. And in the case of this first offering, there were several volumes of Grimtooth's Traps that progressively used a wide variety of submissions that Flying Buffalo received for the creations of these books. These were selected as kind of the opening offering, and many of them are very, very universal and generic. As far as mechanics go, because they are designed to work with a variety of systems, they don't actually have hard mechanics. You don't know how much damage that crossbow bolt, for example, might do, because different games have different systems of dealing with damage or the mechanics for locating or deciphering a threat. So instead it uses a relative skull system on a scale of 1 to 5 skulls. 5 being the deadliest, 1 being a mere nuisance or not deadly at all. Not without some help. But by doing this, firstly, there's no mechanics to have to decipher, nor need for an extensive collection of statistics for various games. You take the trap and you insert the amount of damage that is appropriate for the level of threat that you want to pose. Perhaps being commensurate with a weapon that does a similar amount of damage, going all the way up to, you're dead, sorry, it's a trap. That is basically how this catalyst system works. Now that I've explained the basics for you, we can start giving it proper criticism by breaking it down into its components. The first category I will judge it upon is its aesthetic. And in this case, it is a game manual from the 80s. It is not full of fine art. The illustration is done by Steve Crumpton, who was the illustrator for much of Flying Buffalo's works. If you have seen any other Flying Buffalo games from, well, Nuclear War, Legentia, as I've said before, you will be familiar already with Steve Crumpton's work. He does solid art. It's not fine art, black and white mostly, clickings, and his style is very specific. Almond-shaped eyes, very sharply pointed ears on elves. Most of the proportions generally are compact, but within realistic boundaries. As far as physical objects, he does excellent representation, so there's no ambiguity. You look at something that he has created and you know instantly what point he's trying to get across. The image flows fairly well off the paper. There are illustrations of all of the more complicated traps that can't just be summed up with a few words. And as far as that goes, the diagrams do the job explaining the mechanics of the trap. There is not a great deal of lurid art all over the place. The art is functional. It delivers the point of outlining these traps so that a game master can imagine the trap and put it into their world, filling in the details for the players. And the ability to see the trap and how it's explained to work is very effective as far as outlining what you are trying to pit your players against as a game master. Clearly this is a module specifically designed for the game master. Players will only spoil the surprises if they decide to browse through this, which is something of a weakness for this kind of a book. You have a small audience in what is already a fairly niche community of potential purchasers. But for those game masters who are tired of players mocking them for their unimaginative traps, something like this and having illustrations so that you can fully unleash a trap and give it fair due may upgrade your game a bit. Now, I'm definitely going to give this a passing grade. It's not lavish, but it is functional. You're not going to buy this for the pretty art, but what is there is fine for letting your players know what they are up against. Some of the illustrations, for example, some of the step and die traps, primed off of a pressure plate or some sort of a trigger, some of them are, quite clear about how much these things are going to hurt. So As far as aesthetics, then, I give it a passing grade. From the cover art showing a particularly nasty bit of trap, to various places in the book outlining how some of these traps are to go. Example here. Some of these traps are quite good. Now, mechanics. As I said, the catalyst system, there's no mechanics involved. It is all relative, and it is for the game master to take the mechanics for the game that you're playing and insert this system and lay it over your game system. So it avoids needing to have any kind of real mechanical qualities. I generally find that their rating system is in line with how dangerous the individual traps would be. However, it requires a little bit of skill or time by the game master to take this rating system and incorporate their own numbers into it, especially if that game master is a little shaky on the mechanics, not truly understanding, relative values that you would need to know to be able to appropriately plug in the correct amounts of danger a particular trap would engender. In that, the grade is kind of a push. It's not bad because there's no mechanic that they're shooting for. It's a little less useful for the game master because they have to do work to use a supplement in the game. The best ones are easy to just throw in and use immediately. So a little bit of work is required to make these traps live up to their potential. But if you have grasp your game and you understand what represents an appropriate challenge for the situation, it's not difficult to use this system. So it's not excessively helpful, but it doesn't overtly hinder it. It's still pretty decent for what it does. So it's a push rather than a plus. Now, as far as the writing is perfectly competent. The editor did a fine job taking a variety of trap submissions from a variety of submitters. They're all processed with the style has been laid over the entirety of it so that it's not very jerky and just copy-pasted. Not that you'd copy and paste back in that time. But what is there is told with a solid narrative style, outlining and displaying for the reader all of these various traps and the ways that they can bedevil the players. In that, it's actually an enjoyable read for a game master, and if your game master isn't going to use these upon you, a player can pick it up and wince at the various descriptions of how these traps would imperil their characters. That is a real plus. There is some humor involved with the telling of the story of these traps. From the narrator-collaborator, a troll named Grimtooth, fictional of course, who has nothing but disdain for the heroes who would attempt to pierce into the dungeon and liberate its treasures. These traps are very much written from the perspective of a vindictive troll who enjoys the misery and death that these traps will bring. In that case, mission accomplished. It's definitely a big thumbs up from me. I find it to be an enjoyable read, even if I myself don't use much of the material that is in here. Occasionally, as the highlight of a particular dungeon or a delve, or if you just want to come up with something more imaginative, having something like this at hand to give you some ideas where it's not a pain to read and much as it would be if it was just a single catalog going point by point with all of the various traps that are available. This is presented in a way that is enjoyable to read and, again, it would be simplicity to take these elements and insert them into your own game. So definitely gets a passing grade for this this element that it has accomplished. Now, as far as overall value, this one is going to be a bit tricky. You see, some game masters really don't like using traps. They're impersonal, they slow down gameplay. If you're concentrating on a narrative story, traps themselves rarely have a good story to them. These traps don't add much of a story. They're a toolbox. They give you more tools that you can use to challenge the players in new and creative ways. Therefore, for some game masters who don't use traps and don't really want to, clearly the value here is mostly going to be for the reading of such and the entertainment that can be gathered, more so than a mechanical assistant to your game. As far as the overall quality of the traps involved, it is rather up and down. Some of them are not very imaginative. There's a trap with a spyglass in it that when you put pressure to put it to your eye, it launches a blade into your eye. Nothing overly dramatic except showing a nice cross-section with the mechanic that such a thing would do. It's all right, I suppose. To other traps that are somewhat elaborate, not very particularly useful. For example, a staircase that turns into a slide when somebody triggers it, at the bottom of which there is a swinging pit, at the bottom of which is a teleporter pad, which teleports somebody up into a chute, which drops them down onto a single spike that they were able to see as they were climbing up the stairs and were perhaps laughing that they had avoided. As opposed to just teleporting them and dropping them onto the spike, it's apparently important for the irony of the effect they get dropped onto a spike that they themselves saw. I don't find something like that particularly interesting. However, there are some traps in here that I genuinely do appreciate the cleverness behind. There's one called Mirror, Mirror, and the Fall, which uses a dungeon cross-section, which appears to be an open channel. However, the floor is either bottomless or full of spikes, so it encourages the players to either leap across the pit or fly across, but in truth, it's actually cross-sectioned by a mirror at a 45-degree angle, giving a false impression of how the passage would go. So if somebody were to, say, teleport to the far end, they might find themselves in a great deal of discomfort because the actual end of the corridor isn't actually there. They're actually seeing what is around the corner that they can see at a 45-degree angle. This misdirection is a clever trap, and one that I admit I did not myself think about first. But when I used it, it was entertaining. There are a few traps in here that I certainly have used and have enjoyed, but I use it sparingly because I don't use traps myself very often. Other game masters who do use traps, but again struggle to find imaginative traps or ones that have the correct element of drama to incorporate it into your game, something like this could be quite valuable. I would say out of this book of 101, and that 101st trap is humorous, but I'm not going to spoil the surprise should you buy this. On the last page of the book. But out of all of these traps, I would say perhaps 30 of them are good traps on themselves that stand up and have enough innovation that they're worthy of consideration. Some of them are laughable, like ones that dump you into a tank full of giant lobsters for irony. But all in all, it has some good ideas. It has very good writing, solid artistry, and I generally think that this has value on its own. Having the physical copy of it, and I've had it now for quite a few years. I've read this book occasionally just to, refresh in my mind a few of the existence of several of the traps. Sometimes I like to torment my players by leaving this on the table so that when they come in and they see the Grimtooth Traps books out, they'll know to be worried if I want to inspire that level of paranoia or panic in them. It can be a useful psychological tool, I find. But is it worth the price? Honestly, I believe I paid $15 for this book a long time ago. I think I bought this at my gaming store in 1996, perhaps. So, while it is clearly out of print, there are still copies that you can find in the secondhand markets. Also of interest, the PDF version is available at DriveThruRPG. It occasionally goes on sale, but its common price is $14.99. If you like collecting PDFs, I would say $15 is a fair value for a nice little humorous module. If you can find it on a sale, and Flying Buffalo does have sales from time to time, it's, I wouldn't say must-have, but it's definitely a worthy buy. As of the time that I did my research for this particular piece, I did notice that it had been on sale for just $5, which I could definitely recommend without any great difficulty. So, as this was a collaborative work, again, up and down, this is a solid piece of gaming lore. It can be a fun read, it can be a useful psychological tool for your players, and it can really give you some ideas on an area that is largely neglected in most games these days. While most people know of the existence of traps, and there may be even entire classes or parts of a game built around traps, usually the psychology of those traps and a great deal of variety and various things that you can really do to change the complexion of encounters within your game by inserting a clever trap here and there, making it either more challenging or possibly frustrating, but more exciting for your players. This can be something that can help you out to a certain extent. And if that's the kind of thing that can punch up your encounter and turn a meh encounter into a wow encounter, I'd say it's definitely worth the digital ink. I am the OmnusCritic, and I'm happy to have been able to show this to you, and I look forward to serving you the next time that I have in my hands another work worthy of consideration of the OmnusCritic. Thank you, and farewell.